Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
We elect our local officials, especially those who control the municipalities, whether it's Marion County or the city of Ocala or any municipality, really. You kind of entrust them to do the job that will make the city the best city possible. And we look at the things that make a city the best city in a couple different ways. We want to make sure it's environmentally a nice city, so there are trees and parks, etc. And you want to make sure that there's a good infrastructure. You want to make sure that the bridges are there and the roads are in good shape, etc. And everything, all of those things require money. And so one of the biggest things that any elected official has on his or her plate to do is to be able to be responsible with taxpayer money. And if you don't understand how the economics of a city work, then you're kind of lost. And that's why we have planning professionals, and we have a whole planning department here in Marion County. These are people who've studied this and can help out with the elected officials, because quite honestly, sometimes when somebody is elected into a position, they are blindsided. They don't even know what they're getting themselves into. They have good intention, but they don't always know. That's why it's good to have a resource. So we have a resource we want to tell you about. It's a book written by our guest, Dr. Gerald L. Gordon. Dr. Gordon is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Economic Development Authority in Fairfax County, Virginia. And let's welcome him right now. Thank you, Dr. Gordon. It's an honor to have you on the show. What exactly is the title of the book? I'm not so sure I have it right.
Understanding Economic Growth and Regional Decline. Cities and communities, regions around the United States of all sizes and locations, how they grow their economies, what happens when their economy declines, and how you can recover from some of those things. And the book is based on a lot of interviews and visits that I made across the United States with hundreds of companies, hundreds of mayors, talking about what they've tried, what worked, and what didn't.
Okay, so this would be from the the city council point of view, or the things that they would do from the mayor on down?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay, and the rest of us who are not in their positions, we often, we're the armchair quarterbacks, and we always say, here's what they should do, and we don't really understand the money involved in doing some of those things that we think they should do.
Well, it's a valid point, because economic development is really an investment, and it takes communities some foresight and extraordinarily strong leadership to invest funds in attracting new businesses or growing new businesses when there's so many other competing demands for those resources. So
in the municipal spectrum here in our local area, we have really the three primary groups are the decision makers at the state level, the county level, and then the city level. Does the book apply to all three?
It does. This is actually the fifth book in a series. Each of the previous books dealt with communities of different sizes. So it started out with major cities and large regions, and then it went down to what the Census Department is now referring to as micropolitan communities, which are 10 to 50,000. And then there was a book on small, rural, isolated communities of fewer than 10,000. Interestingly, some of the lessons are common across the board, and some of them are unique to the size or kind of community.
Okay, and what you just said right there is something I've often wondered. In trying to make decisions, I think that we sometimes want to invent the mousetrap rather than looking around and see who's already done it. Is that part of what we should be doing as leaders in our community?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, because there are a variety of communities that are going to be just the same size and sort of the same description. They've tried things before, and some of them worked, some of them didn't work. And it'd be interesting to know, for your leadership, to know which ones did not work.
I'm originally from New York, and what I always say about Ocala, where I am now, is a small town. And New York, obviously, is a huge town. But the truth about New York is it's really lots of small neighborhoods. And each one of those neighborhoods has like a neighborhood council for the most part. Chelsea, for example, in the not lower west side, but on the west side, they have a little council right there. I don't know if they have money to spend, but I know they make decisions about the sidewalks and things of that nature. Is that a different dynamic in a large city where the real money spending comes from like the city of New York as opposed to the neighborhood of Chelsea?
It is different in many ways, but it's also similar. I spent part of my childhood on the Upper West Side, and there was a neighborhood council. This is in Washington Heights.
Okay.
And they had some governance authority, but nothing in the way of resources that they could spend. It was really more cajoling and encouraging people. But still, there are some lessons to be learned from those communities.
Okay, but the book is about isolated small towns, am I right?
The fourth book was about isolated small towns. The new book is an overview of all the lessons learned from all the types of community and sizes across the entire United States.
Oh, okay. Could you repeat the title of the new book, please?
Yes, it's Understanding Local Government and Municipal Decline, something like that. They've changed the title on me twice. So
okay, yeah. The reason I was asking, I wanted to put the cover on the podcast, and I have the Economic Survival of America's Isolated Small Towns right now. As the cover.
If you go on, it was published by Routledge Press, Routledge, and it'll be on their website, or Amazon has it as well.
When you wrote this book, do you think that the communities, the leaders from each community that have read this book, do you think they're going to use it as a guideline to market their own communities to the rest of the world?
When I've talked to people who have in leadership positions in municipalities who have read some of these books, what they tell me is that more often they've learned things that did not work somewhere else, as opposed to the things that did work. Because in some cases they'll tell me, we were thinking about something similar to that, and now we've learned what to look out for as we do it.
Oh, okay. And so are there any examples you can give us in this interview of tried but untrue things that have been tried but failed that many people think will work?
Well, I'll give you one that has been tried and failed, but has also in other communities been tried and succeeded.
Oh, okay.
And that is building or developing an industrial park or an office park on speculation, hoping that then you will be able to attract businesses to it.
Okay. If you build it, they will come.
Precisely.
Yeah. And does that not work?
So it has worked in many communities, and they realize an immediate return on their investment. But there have also been communities where it did not succeed, and so the investment was either lost or they had to extend the carrying the whatever payments that they had to make as a result.
Now, in New York City, where you are you there right now?
No, that was just part of my childhood. I'm in Virginia right now.
Okay, but the two buildings that come to mind are sort of like what you're talking about. The Empire State Building was empty for a while. Mm-hmm. I wasn't around, but I remember learning that. And what was the other one? The Rockefeller Center had the same problem, mm-hmm. Remember? And I think that the World Trade Center buildings that came down, and maybe even the new one, maybe they've had that same. So is it just a matter of time? And in those examples that I just gave, I think all of those were private money that paid for them.
Right. Yeah, the danger in building a lot of office space and getting overbuilt is, of course, that when the supply is high and the demand is low, the price is going to come down. And that affects not only the owners of the building, who then won't realize the same rents, but it also affects the local government, who's in many cases dependent upon real estate taxes based on the best value of
right.
Did you interview community leaders from around the United States, or were you able to have access to different studies that have been done in each community to make comparisons?
A little bit of the latter, but for the most part, I talked to about 250 mayors, heads of universities, economic development professionals, chambers, a wide array of individuals who were able to tell their story for their communities.
Have you found that there were any kinds of successes in each community that were similar?
Yeah, I think the successes are all based on, first of all, it all starts with leadership. And if the community's leaders are able to act or react quickly and in a united, collaborative way, maybe even in a regional way, then the recovery has been quicker. And part of that is because when jobs are lost, if a company leaves town or they downsize due to a decline in their industry, the jobs that are lost have people in them, and those people have skill sets that are now represent an asset that's valuable when you try to attract a new business. But if you wait too long, you can lose that asset because those people will, as Ronald Reagan said, move with their feet.
And that happened in our state of Florida when the space program, when the space shuttles were shut down a few years ago. When that whole program was shut down, there were 10,000 employees from NASA just here in Florida on the Space Coast that lost their jobs, and that meant that they had to find other jobs, and most of them moved out of that community, and thereby schools. There were a couple schools that were shut down, some businesses were shut down, and it's taken a few years for that area to recoup. Exactly
right. And it snowballs, because when you lose the jobs and you lose the revenue to the tax base, real estate tax revenues, and you have all the vacant space so that there's no demand built up for the new construction of office space. And that means that there's even further reductions in the real estate revenues for the local government to provide public services with. So schools can decline, public services across the board can decline. And interesting, one of the things, I call this the double whammy in the most recent book, because when that happens and the community, the municipality doesn't have the resources to spend, particularly on things like human services, then you have community groups, churches, and other groups that help people who are in need, but a lot of their resources come from the major corporations that have left town. And so you have what I refer to as a double whammy.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Do you know, I want to use two local examples. One is the Villages. I don't know if you've heard of the Villages.
Yes.
And then one is this town here, Ocala. The Villages, the way I understand it, is they are the government of their town. Or they own all the buildings. They don't depend on private investors to build. They just lease out the space that they built. And so that's one, I guess, role model that other cities might look at. They're really successful, so I don't know if that's why they're successful. Here in this town, we had a downtown area that was really falling apart maybe 30 years ago. And to the credit of the local officials, they did whatever they needed to do. Now, these were private but falling apart buildings that nobody wanted anything to do with. And so the downtown area was like a ghost town. The surrounding areas of the town were doing well, but the middle of the town, where there should have been a lot of commerce, nothing was happening. And then they made a decision to do something, and they invested taxpayer money to benefit the local businesses, and to the opposition of many people, including people in talk radio. I remember at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. But at the same time, you had to say, well, who's right here? But now, in hindsight, they were right. They were right to do this, because now we have a beautiful, thriving downtown area.
Yeah, you've made a couple of really key points. First one is that this is all about leadership. I spoke to leaders in communities that were at such a low level of decline in their economy that the mayor or a city council member would say to me, I don't think we can recover, or I'm leaving town, leaving an absolute void of leadership.
Yeah.
It all starts with leadership. And the second thing is that it is absolutely an investment. So they took a risk in Ocala, but they've realized the return on the investment. If no risk had been taken, you may still be in a ghost town.
And that's where good leadership comes in, because good leaders will work with other people in their community. They won't let their ego get in the way and say, well, I'm great, I'm going to solve everybody's problem, and it's all because of me.
Exactly, and it's neither a Democratic nor a Republican issue. This is about people's lives and their ability to earn an income and provide for their families.
Yeah, it did seem like a political divide, though, back at that time, only because it clearly was divided down the line of the political lines. Yeah, but I think you're right. I think if you looked, if you could have been a guest on a radio show, let's say 30 years ago when these talks were happening, and P.S. I just want to say it took 30 years, or maybe 20, because it's been pretty good for about 10 years. So it took some time. It wasn't like an overnight fix.
Right. That is typical. But again, most investments are not overnight returns.
Yeah.
Were there any absurdities that you found in your research where you could glowingly see that, this shouldn't have even happened and it could have been sidestepped?
Yes, I think there was. I actually did not part of this research, but I did a Fulbright scholarship in northern Scotland about 15 years ago, and that community, which was very sparsely populated, had lost its primary employer, which was a nuclear power generating facility that was being decommissioned. And unfortunately, that was 110,000 administrative people and IT workers and engineers and various forms of technicians. And once they realized that they were going to be decommissioning their facility, the community did nothing. And as a consequence, every time they downsized a piece of it or decommissioned a piece of it, they lost thousands upon thousands of engineers and technicians. And at the end, they had nothing left to attract a new employer. And that is very, very typical, not usually on that scale, but it's typical. If you don't react quickly, you lose the very asset that you need to recover.
Now, see, we had a couple of communities here, including Ocala, I think, Robert, help me if I'm wrong on this one, where before Disney World was built, Walt Disney actually looked at this area.
Yeah. And
I think the University of Florida also was kicked out, or they were going to be here, but the city leaders at that time said no, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Now, some people say that was a good thing because some people don't like the bustle of that area. But financially, it's got to be a win for everybody in the Orlando area, right?
Absolutely. Remember that communities in most states, communities base their public services on real estate tax generation. So without that, there go your schools, and without that go your public libraries and parks and everything you can imagine.
With this kind of information, it sounds like it would be beneficial. And tell me, what is the state, I don't mean to throw you a curveball, but what's the state of Detroit? Because we heard that Detroit was going through some hard times, and a few years ago, are they on the trail back?
They are. It's very, very slow because partly because the workforce that they had is no longer, those skill sets are no longer in demand in Detroit. So a lot of those people have gone on to Alabama, South Carolina, and other states where they're building automobiles. But the process has also changed so that a lot of it's mechanized and robotized, so that there's not a great demand for people to work in those industries. So part of what's happening in Detroit has to be retraining these people who have basic strong skills and good small motor skills, and make sure that they are retrained for the kinds of businesses that are looking for those kinds of employees.
How can communities make realistic projections for the upcoming year, whatever kind of revenue that the city is going to, or the county is going to be receiving, and also how much money the private sector business is going to be making?
Yeah, if they're basing their revenues on real estate taxes, all they need to know is what the assessed value of the property is, because even if companies leave the office space or the facility, the owners are still paying taxes on that, or the bank that inherits it or takes it over. they still have to pay the taxes on it. So the community could be saved in that sense, but you still lose the jobs. The value of the properties go down because the supply is greater than the demand. And so there's a lot of ins and outs to it. It's very difficult for communities to project revenue growth. It's much easier to project demand for new public services.
I have a question about the real estate. What is it, REIT, R-E-I-T?
Yes.
Is that a viable way to develop a community, having people like me invest in a brick or part of a building?
Yeah, it has worked on in buildings. It's not. It may be a part of a community's growth plan, but it can't support an entire community unless it's a very small.
So it's just a small part of it, yeah.
Well, your book and your research is very fascinating because this will also be beneficial to the students that are studying.
Absolutely. In fact, I am in the process of moving down to South Carolina, where I'll be teaching at the College of Charleston, mostly around the research that was in these books that led to these books.
So can you give us information on how to get the book? I went to Amazon. I found your books. I did not find this particular book, though.
The publisher, it's on the publisher's website, and the publisher is Routledge, Routledge, in New York.
Doctor, thank you for being on the air with us. I have known people who worked in the planning office, by the way, of our local municipality. I think it was the county planning office. This would help them, wouldn't it?
I think so. They have a tough job, particularly in communities that are in decline. So knowing what other people have gone through would be useful.
Does it also, can it be applied to decisions about roads?
To the extent that they run through the downtown area where the business community might be, then yes, roads become part of the attractive or unattractive features that attract businesses or don't.
Yeah, in our area, what a lot of talk is about the loops, the bypasses, the things that go around and don't really go through. And I always think that's just going to take business away. You're going to give people a way to not have to be in town at all.
It can do that,
Yeah.
Unless you have another attraction in town that brings people in.
Mm-hmm.
You could be moving people around.
Thank you. Have a happy new year, and thank you for being on the show with us today. It's been an honor.
Same to you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. We'll be right back.